In the open area outside the houses, a voice echoed from a drone hovering in the air. It was Tara's voice, clear and commanding, calling out to everyone to confirm their positions. Nearby, vampires with long, sharp mouths hunched over, tearing at the remains of their victim. They paused briefly, sensing an approaching presence. A girl entered through the gate, her mission clear. She was there to exterminate the Category 3 vampires. Standing alone with her arms behind her back, the girl wore a serious expression as she focused intently on the vampires. Suddenly, her eyes widened in fear at the sight of one vampire feeding on the body of a dead woman. The vampire smirked at her, and in the blink of an eye, it lunged forward, ready to attack. As it jumped, a sharp sound filled the air. The vampire's body was sliced into several pieces, and its head fell to the ground with a heavy thud. The remaining vampires froze in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Even the vampire in the sharp suit stood in disbelief. The girl, undeterred, prepared for her next move. She stepped forward, ready to charge, while the other vampires remained motionless, still stunned by the scene. With a flash, she moved quickly, charging her baseball bat for a powerful strike. She swung fiercely, and in an instant, another vampire's head fell to the ground. Her eyes burned with fury as she continued to strike, her bat smoking slightly from the force of her attacks. The other vampires stood frozen, unable to believe that she was defeating them with just a baseball bat. Finally, one trembling vampire shouted, "She's a hunter," just before meeting the same fate. The girl stood tall, a slight smile on her face as she faced the remaining vampires. With a tap of her baseball bat against her palm, she calmly asked, "Who's next?" Suddenly, a vampire sprinted toward her, but before it could reach her, a flash of movement sliced through the air. The vampire's body fell apart, thanks to a girl wielding a sword. "Good grief," she exclaimed. This girl was Shiju Mifune. She turned to Kariya, the earlier girl, and shouted about why Kariya had gone off on her own instead of sticking to their plan. Kariya simply looked at her, calm and collected. Mifune continued, criticizing Kariya's attitude and weapon, calling them a joke. Kariya pointed her baseball bat at Mifune's chest and quipped that her large breasts were even more of a joke. Mifune glared back, warning Kariya to back off or face her wrath. Kariya replied smoothly, calling Mifune a big-titty samurai while suggesting she was stealing her prey. Just then, more vampires approached, ready to attack. Two figures emerged from the shadows. One wielded a pickaxe and was named Amadi, while the other, Hashimir, fought with her bare fists. Amadi cried, asking why Kariya had entered the house alone and why Mifune and Kariya were arguing. Hashimir, speaking softly, noted that the vampires had been exterminated. Mifune encouraged Hashimir to speak up, urging her to be louder. Kariya, smiling, patted Amadi on the head, complimenting her on using a heavy hammer. This made Amadi feel confused. Despite being the oldest among them, she was treated like a child. As they chatted, Kariya heard muttering from a vampire. She turned and saw a dying vampire crawling on the floor. With a swift motion, she stomped on its face with her baseball bat, grinning as she said, "No peeping." Vampires possessed extraordinary powers. They had heightened senses of smell, drained their prey of blood and flesh, and could punch with enough strength to break concrete. They blended in with humans, secretly feeding on blood. Though their existence was hidden, about 3,000 vampire-related deaths were reported each year, and the threat continued to grow. Hunters, who exterminated vampires, disguised themselves as ordinary people to attract these creatures. They were the lone protectors of humanity against hidden threats. While Kariya and the others continued chatting, a vampire, despite its torn body, launched an attack from behind Kariya. Just as the vampire was about to reach her, another girl appeared and shot it. Kariya, shocked by the sudden turn of events, realized she was in danger. The newcomer scolded Kariya for failing to finish off her prey, reminding her that she called herself a hunter. She claimed that the quick response of Unit 6 was as wild as the rumors suggested and expressed her disappointment. Amadi asked who the newcomer was, but no one answered. Instead, Kariya stared seriously at the girl. This was the Madara House, the women's dormitory for the Anti-Vampire Special Operations Command Base 6. The girl introduced herself as Subaru Ryo, announcing her intention to join them. Amadi smiled happily and began to say, "Nice to meet you," but Ryo interrupted, insisting there was no need for pleasantries. She had no intention of getting acquainted and only wanted to share necessary information about hunting. She expected no kindness or consideration and preferred to be left alone. As she walked past them, she stated that she would take her leave. Kariya then asked her teammates why they hadn't informed her about the new member. This led to a shouting match over who was at fault. Even though Rio was already outside the room, she could hear their discussion. Meanwhile, Kariya spotted something interesting and smirked. Rio was in her room organizing her belongings when Kariya suddenly entered. Rio asked if she needed help, but Kariya smiled and introduced herself, saying she was just curious about Rio. Kariya approached Rio, surprising her, and asked if she could inquire about something. Rio felt a sense of unease but was caught off guard when Kariya asked if her body was white down there too. Rio, immediately shocked, questioned the meaning behind the inquiry. Kariya clarified that she was referring to Rio's eyebrows and lashes, wondering what was like down there. Rio replied, saying that despite Kariya's appearance, she was crude. Kariya teased that those with a crude demeanor often performed better in battle. Kariya continued, stating that vampires were just creepy old men thirsting after younger girls. By acting ladylike and meek, it became easier to lure the vampires. She added that her aggressive mimicry was her own way to fight. Vampires underestimated her, thinking she was easy prey, allowing her to strike back and crush them. Kariya found excitement in the encounter. Rio could only wonder about Kariya's mindset as she pressed for more details, asking if Rio was really white. Rio, feeling Kariya was being inappropriate, insisted she wouldn't answer. Kariya then shifted the topic, asking if something had happened to Rio in the past. She grasped Rio's hair and noted that hair could turn white due to stress, having seen it before. She insisted that something about Rio smelled fishy and demanded to know what had happened. Kariya continued, probing about the involvement of vampires and what had transpired. Suddenly, Rio remembered a past encounter with vampires, recalling their first appearance as if they were alive. She shouted at Kariya to stop talking and to please stay away from her. Kariya stepped back, surprised by Rio's reaction. Rio went to her bed, exclaiming, "What the hell? What's wrong with her?" She hugged a teddy bear, contemplating when she last spoke to someone so closely. Suddenly, she heard someone calling Kariya's name, urging her to come back. Curious, Rio peeked out to see Kariya running with a towel, demanding it back while she was showering. Rio thought to herself that Kariya was already causing trouble elsewhere. Was it always this rowdy? While watching her teammates argue, Rio heard a voice from a phone. She picked it up and identified herself as Rio Subaru. Tara's voice greeted her, expressing relief at finding the newcomer. Tara explained that they had received an extermination order, a confirmed Category 5 vampire at Point 69, with the Madara house being closest to the scene. It was a top priority operation for all of Unit 6, and they needed to head out immediately. Rio turned and saw the blood and bodies on the floor. In a low voice, she said, "Roger, we'll be there right away," before hanging up the phone and putting it back where she found it. After that, Rio slowly walked out the door, unnoticed by her colleagues. Explosions echoed in the vicinity where the vampire was currently tearing apart its victim. As it feasted, it muttered a wish to eat a schoolgirl. Suddenly, a grenade landed behind it, exploding and revealing Rio in the area. She was ready to attack, using her gun while the vampire suffered from a blast. Rio entered, shooting the vampire, which shouted that the girl was a hunter. The vampire attempted to attack her, but she managed to dodge. Such a skilled girl, the vampire noted, silver bullets, bombs, and a knife. It saw its arm cut by Rio's knife. The vampire, serious and angry, remarked that Rio was not like other humans. She had a different, tasty scent. Upon hearing this, Rio's eyes widened, and she opened fire, shouting in anger, "Shut up and die." However, the vampire merely regenerated its body from the gunshots, grinning demonically at Rio. Meanwhile, Kariya noticed the phone and took it, hearing Tara announce that Subaru Rio had gone on a mission by herself and had turned off all communications. Kariya calmly asked Tara about the girl. Tara replied that the Union wouldn't disclose anything, but she had gathered information from reliable sources. Subaru Rio was in danger. Kariya smiled, intrigued. "Oh, the plot thickens, Rio," she said. Meanwhile, Rio was serious, reloading her gun and preparing to attack. She shot the vampire repeatedly, creating large holes in its body. Yet the vampire struck with a powerful attack, causing Rio to drop her gun and realize she was in danger. The vampire, regenerating again, screamed with rage that the scent of blood only increased its appetite. Rio's hand dripped with blood as fear washed over her. The vampire leaped toward her, demanding, "Give it to me." Rio couldn't react fast enough to avoid the attack and was left with a shocked expression. Just in the nick of time, Korea dashed in, saving Rio from the vampire's assault. "Why are you here?" Rio asked, astonished. Korea ignored her question, instead pulling the pin from a grenade and tossing it at the vampire. A massive explosion erupted in front of the vampire, which recognized the silver powder as its weakness. After the fight, Korea reprimanded Rio for acting alone. "You shouldn't go off on your own," she said. Rio asked where the others were, and Korea, smiling, replied that it was just the two of them that day, winking at Rio. Panting for the encounter, Rio attempted to bandage her hand from the scratches. She said, "Well, I'm fine now. Thanks for your help, but I'll manage on my own." Korea, serious, advised Rio to keep a first aid kit since working while bleeding was difficult. Korea revealed that Tara had informed her about Rio's past and her blood curse, explaining that her blood was especially enticing to vampires. Korea noted that once a vampire caught a whiff of Rio's blood, it could hunt her for eternity. Suddenly, Korea's eyes brightened. "That's awesome," she exclaimed, leaving Rio confused. "You don't think so? Your blood can attract vampires, and my aggressive mimicry is nothing compared to that." Rio questioned Korea's reasoning, but Korea only grinned and hugged her arm. "What I mean is, I can use you as bait for vampires." Korea suggested that with her hunting skills and Rio's allure, it would be a win-win situation. Rio resisted Korea's embrace, insisting it couldn't be that convenient. She recounted her past losses, her mother, father, friends, and combat teacher, all of whom died trying to protect her. Tears streamed down her face as she shouted, "This blood, it's all because of me. I can't let anyone else die." Korea attempted to respond, but the ground beneath them began to tremble. Suddenly, the vampire from earlier emerged, furious and ready to kill. "You didn't forget about me, did you, miss dinner?" it snarled, threatening to devour them both. Korea faced the vampire with a serious expression. As Rio gasped at the sight, Korea reassured her, "You worry too much." Flashbacks of Korea's past as a child in a prison flooded her mind, where she was treated like a defective product, a pawn to be used. Anyone who approached her was seen as an enemy. With determination, Korea shouted, "Stand back, Rio. I'm going to remove that fear from you." She readied her weapon, charging with fierce resolve. "Massacre bat technique," she called out, throwing a powerful attack at the vampire. The resulting explosion obliterated the vampire's body. The glass windows shattered with the force of the blast, and Rio stood in shock at Korea's ability to eliminate the vampire in a single strike. Korea smiled at Rio, teasing, "Did you get wet? You see, your curse won't work on me." She added that everyone at Madara was just as strong. Rio felt a rush of emotions, memories of avoiding closeness flooding her mind. Korea reached out her hand, a warm smile on her face. "Welcome to Madara," she said. Rio felt a sense of acceptance as she grasped Korea's hand, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I'll be in your care," she said softly. Meanwhile, a flying drone monitored them from above. A mysterious man observed, noting the vampire attractor, Subaru Rio. No wonder the association was adamant about bringing her to the Madara unit. This could work in their favor. He concluded they needed supplies for a welcoming party before the drone flew away. Korea insisted on treating Rio's wounds, while Rio reflected that Korea didn't seem like a bad person, just a bit eccentric. Korea then asked about their earlier conversation, but Rio had missed the context. Suddenly, Korea tugged down Rio's pants quickly, staring intently, and exclaimed, "Nice view." Rio was shocked and embarrassed by Korea's boldness, her face turning crimson as Korea shouted with shining eyes, "They're white." Chapter 2. Subaru Rio is a new student joining the school today. She stands in front of her classmates as they quietly murmur about her appearance. Some of them comment that she's very pretty, has long legs, and has white hair, wondering if she's a foreigner. After a few seconds of silence, Rio introduces herself. She says that she has no intention of getting acquainted with anyone, that interactions with her should be limited to necessary information only, and that she doesn't expect any kindness or consideration. Lastly, she asks to be left alone. After her introduction, the class remains silent for a minute, processing what she said. Before this, Rio had received instructions from Tara of the association. She was told that she needed to report to the school the next day. Rio would be attending Sakuragaka Private Girls High School, a prestigious institution. Kariya also goes there. Meanwhile, Rio was spending time with one of their team members, Shija Mifyun. Tara asked her how things were going with the team, commenting that it seemed lively. Rio replied that it was too noisy and that she didn't like it. Tara, understanding her concerns, replied, saying, "I know you have your worries about your blood situation, but remember, you're a hunter and don't forget your duties." Rio's teacher then told her that she could sit at the back of the class. Rio quickly agreed and walked to the back. She thought to herself, this is how it should be. Hunters shouldn't put civilians in danger. As she walked, someone caught her attention and said, "Hello there." Kariya introduced herself and said, "Nice to meet you, Subaru Rio." Rio was a bit shocked because Kariya was already in the school. Confused, Rio didn't understand what Kariya meant, but Kariya acted as though she didn't know anything and instead said the class was starting soon. She offered Rio her textbook. Rio sat down and, in a quiet voice, asked Kariya what she was saying and why she was acting like that. Kariya kept up her act as a good student, saying that she knew it was Rio's first day, but not to be nervous. If there was anything Rio didn't understand, she shouldn't hesitate to ask. Kariya added that she would do her best to help, smiling and saying, "Let's get along." Rio was completely confused by Kariya's attitude. Rio observed Kariya during class. Her classmates were saying that Kariya had taken it upon herself to look after the new student, not wanting Rio to have a hard time. They praised Kariya, calling her so kind. But Rio remembered what Kariya had said to her before. Did something happen in the past? Outside in the hallway, Rio watched Kariya again as the teacher thanked her for helping carry some books. Rio recalled Kariya's words from before. "I can just use you as vampire bait." Later, Kariya told Rio that their next class would be PE and that they needed to get changed. Kariya seemed embarrassed to change in front of everyone, but Rio's thoughts were different. She felt a bit angry at Kariya, remembering what she had said before. They are white. Lunch break arrived, and Rio decided to sit far away from the other students. She muttered, "What the heck?" as she drank her jelly, her mind racing over Kariya's strange behavior. She couldn't understand what had happened to the vulgar Kariya she knew before. It was as if everyone had bought into her new act. Rio couldn't help but wonder what kind of hunter Kariya really was. Suddenly, Kariya appeared, greeting Rio with a cheerful "Hello there." Rio, caught off guard, was so shocked by Kariya's sudden appearance that she spit out the jelly she had been drinking. She stared at Kariya, who was smiling at her. Rio stood in front of her and questioned the sudden shift in behavior, wondering what was behind the honor student act. Kariya, almost on the verge of tears, apologized, saying she didn't quite understand. Rio, clearly frustrated, angrily pointed out that this was exactly what she was talking about. Rio continued angrily, saying, "Our job isn't just about killing vampires. Staying discreet is also part of it. Vampires blend into society as ordinary humans, salarymen, housewives, students. They could be anyone, anywhere." Rio added, "We're bait to them. We lure them in and finish them off. That's why we play the normal schoolgirl role." Suddenly, Rio pulled a piece of paper from her pocket and angrily said, "What kind of normal schoolgirl has a fan club?" Kariya, however, seemed happy, smiling at her picture on a poster with her fan club. Rio continued, saying that Kariya was practically an idol, and told her to stop making that happy face and attracting all that attention. "Take your duties seriously," Rio snapped. But then Kariya's face turned serious as she replied to Rio, "You're yapping too much, transfer student. Be quiet. Your white hair, that lone wolf attitude, eating lunch by yourself. Who's attracting attention again? Besides, standing out makes me good vampire bait, but your attitude just drives everyone away." Rio responded, explaining that she had no choice but to keep people at a distance due to her blood, which attracted vampires. She added that fitting in at school wasn't necessary for her. Kariya smiled in response, already having expected Rio's answer. Kariya offered Rio a bread, which left Rio feeling a bit confused. Korea explained it was a chilly dog she had picked up on the way. You should at least have a good meal, she added. Rio, still puzzled, asked why she was being given the food. Korea explained that she thought someone like Rio, a loner, would likely be eating alone, and that it was meant to cheer up the lonely new student. Rio fell silent for a moment, processing Korea's words before responding, "Oh, I see. You want us to have lunch together." Korea offered the bread to Rio, but there was a hint of shyness in her expression. Rio, unsure, hesitated to accept it. As her hand reached for the bread, something crossed her mind. She suddenly remembered a girl who had called out to her for help, asking Rio to save her. Fear swept over Rio's face, and she quickly pulled her hand back, distancing herself from Korea. Korea, now serious, seemed to realize what had just happened. Rio, still feeling uneasy, thought about how difficult it would be to adjust to the situation. In that moment, a drone appeared in the air, and Tara's voice came through saying, "There you are. There's an extermination order for you. The target is at a warehouse on the pier. Sorry to interrupt your schoolwork, but you're the closest to the site. It's a high-priority mission, so you two should go." As Korea and Rio walked toward the site, Korea asked for more information on the vampires. Tara, from the drone, replied that all she had from the association was that the category was unknown, and there was no count. Korea, holding her baseball bat, commented that it was terrible, and they would be going in blind. When they arrived at the site, Rio noticed something in front of them, a body lying on the ground. Korea called someone and reported that they were at the scene, requesting a cleanup crew. She added that no vampires had been found, as it seemed they had fled after feeding. Suddenly, a voice cried out, "Help me." They saw a man, a possible survivor from the vampire attack. The man, frantic, begged Korea, explaining that a monster had appeared out of nowhere and killed everyone quickly. Rio tried to calm the man, assuring him that it was safe now. But the man, in panic, grabbed Korea's school uniform, pleading for help, saying he didn't want to die. Korea, with a serious expression, held the man's shoulders and asked if he could explain more. With the same serious look, Korea asked the man why he was asking them for help. She pointed out that they were just a couple of high schoolers and wondered if he truly believed they could assist him. Rio was taken aback by Korea's words. Then, without warning, Korea hugged Rio tightly, saying, "You're just way too cute to be any help for an old guy like him." After that, Korea pulled out her baseball bat and struck a vampire in the face, calling it good riddance and labeling it a pervert. Suddenly, many vampires emerged from within the site. Rio exclaimed that there were so many of them, while Korea spoke into the earpiece connected to Tara, saying they needed backup from Madara to help them. Tara replied that everyone was attending to other missions, and that backup would take a while. He advised them to hold off the vampires until then. After the conversation, Korea smiled at Rio, acknowledging Tara's message. Rio's face showed signs of anxiety in response. Korea then adopted a serious yet cheerful demeanor, suggesting they enjoy themselves while fighting the vampires. The vampires moved forward quickly, advancing toward them, while the two girls got ready to fight, each taking her position. The first vampire attacked Rio, but she was quick. She pulled something from her waist and threw it while dodging the attack at the same time. The vampire became confused by what fell in front of him, and a pin from a grenade slipped from Rio's finger, causing an explosion. The vampires soon realized that the grenade contained silver powder, which is effective against common vampires like them. Suddenly, Korea emerged from the smoke, ready to attack. Using her baseball bat, she struck the vampire's head with great force, causing it to fly back quickly. Rio and Korea sensed something was wrong. The vampires were not decreasing in number, but instead kept coming, as if they would never run out. Suddenly, a vampire leaped from behind Rio. When she turned to face it, the vampire froze in fear, leaving Rio confused about why it had stopped. However, another vampire was charging toward her from behind. In a quick reaction, Korea used her leg to push Rio to the ground, preventing her from being hit by the vampire's attack. After that, Korea looked at the vampires and commented on their coordinated attack with overwhelming numbers, finding it troublesome. Someone in the vampire group replied, acknowledging her observation and stating that it was too late to change their plan. They asked where they should attack, whether from the front or from the back. Rio was already in a difficult situation, but Korea remained calm and continued to think carefully. She noted that, after all, they were outnumbered. Korea suddenly grabbed Rio's hand, which startled her, and then quickly ran away. Rio asked, "What's wrong?" After a moment, she realized where they were going and said it was a dead-end place and that they couldn't escape. Korea replied, "Who said anything about escaping?" Suddenly, Korea lifted Rio's hand. Korea, with a serious expression, bit down hard on Rio's finger, causing it to bleed quickly. The moment the blood spilled, Korea's awareness heightened. She knew vampires would soon be drawn to them because of it. As she licked the blood, her actions seemed to beckon the vampires rather than deter them, almost as if she were intentionally calling them. Soon enough, the vampires arrived, their anger and hunger palpable. They were so enraged that even their clothing couldn't withstand the force of their aggression, tearing apart as they moved. They began to speak in hungry voices, mentioning how they could smell something yummy in the air, and their stomachs couldn't hold back from craving the scent of fresh blood. Rio, with tears welling up in her eyes, stood frozen in fear as the vampires fixated on her. They shouted loudly, talking about how the blood of the white-haired girl, Rio, was irresistible, making their hunger more uncontrollable. The vampires grew even more violent, arguing among themselves about who would get to claim her as their meal. The air was filled with their growls, their desperation to feed overwhelming them as they fought over the girl, leaving Rio terrified, hearing their cries for her blood. Korea smiled, observing the chaos as the vampires' hunger seemed to tear apart their coordination. The air around them was thick with anger and hunger, the vampires' growls echoing through the space as they spoke of the sweet scent they were drawn to. They could smell the blood, and, desperate, they needed to consume it. Turning to Rio, Korea spoke calmly, telling her that her blood wasn't a curse or a sin. It was a weapon. Before they could respond, the vampires launched their attack, cornering them in a dead end. Korea quickly prepared herself, jumping into action, leaping with agility before the vampires could even get close. Standing tall, her eyes sharp and focused, she turned her back to them, saying with cold confidence, "Enjoy the show," before unleashing her brutal massacre bat technique. As the vampires attacked Korea from the air, they suddenly felt a strange shift in the wind, almost as if it was being drawn toward her feet. Rio, still in shock, watched in disbelief at the scene unfolding before her. All around them, she saw flashes of Korea's movements, like a series of sharp slashes from a baseball bat, cutting through the air. In just a few moments, every vampire was struck down by her precise attacks. Korea, seemingly weightless, floated in the air, moving with an expert fighting technique. Rio stood frozen, amazed by Korea's skill and speed. Noticing Rio's gaze, Korea flashed a playful smile, as though she were enjoying a game rather than a fight for survival. When the attack was over, the remains of the vampires scattered, their internal organs falling like rain. Korea smiled and turned to Rio, telling her to gather all the trash in one place and dispose of it. She even gave it a name, calling it the Rio Kaika Combo. Rio, still stunned by what had just happened, couldn't quite process the name and shouted in concern, calling Korea's actions reckless and dangerous, especially drawing in all the vampires like that. Korea, however, replied seriously, explaining that if even one vampire was missed and managed to hide back into society, it could harm more innocent people. Rio fell silent, understanding the weight of her words. Korea continued, stressing that they couldn't afford any mistakes. One wrong move, and many lives could be at risk. She made it clear that their mission was to destroy the enemy, and she couldn't have done it alone. With no backup in sight, Korea had to use Rio's blood to lure the vampires out, and that blood had saved countless civilians. She asked Rio if she understood now. Rio, her emotions swelling, held back tears as she realized that her blood wasn't a curse or a sin, but something that could save lives. She finally nodded and thanked Korea, tears streaming down her face. Korea stretched, then mentioned that she had to make a call to report the mission. With a smirk, she asked Rio to count the vampires they had taken down. Rio responded with a simple, okay. Korea muttered something under her breath, but it was too quiet for Rio to hear, leaving her confused about what Korea had said. While walking, Korea asked Rio what made her so fidgety. She responded with a shy face, saying it was the chili dog from earlier. Korea, already knowing, said it might be ruined by now. Rio, gathering her courage, shyly asked if they could eat together. Korea was suddenly surprised, but then he quickly smiled at her and agreed, handing her the chili dog bun. Rio looked at Korea's happy face and recalled something she had muttered earlier. As she remembered what Korea had muttered earlier, she recalled hearing him say, "Maybe we can get that guy with this." While eating the bread, she called out to Korea, intending to ask her about what she had said. However, Korea smiled at her and asked, "It's delicious, right?" trying to avoid the conversation. Rio's face fell silent after that, and instead of pressing further, she chose to smile, continuing to eat the chili dog as they walked back to Madara's house, commenting that the bread was delicious. Chapter 3. On the other hand, Rio encountered some vampires. They immediately charged at her, but she quickly became alert. With swift movements, she dodged their attacks and aimed her gun, shooting them in the head. Even when they tried to hide behind her back to strike, she effortlessly avoided them, jumping and shooting them in the head, causing their bodies to collapse. However, in the middle of this, she suddenly felt something strange. Her pajamas were gone. Startled, she quickly removed the virtual reality device and angrily confronted Korea, demanding to know what her actions meant. Korea replied with a grin, "You're wearing a really shitty tracksuit, so I thought I'd help you take it off." Rio, fuming, snapped back that she didn't need his fashion advice and told him to return her pajamas. Korea, looking curious, asked what she was up to. Rio explained it was a VR vampire hunter. It's a detailed vampire hunting simulation, a training device developed by the association. It's like an accurate depiction of the tension in battle, with HD sound that makes it feel like you're really there. Korea asked to see the VR device, and when she got it, she slammed it hard onto the ground, breaking it. Rio stared in shock at the broken device, completely stunned by what Korea had just done. Rio asked Korea why she had done that, especially since she had borrowed it from Tara, who had already paid for it. Rio felt embarrassed and guilty because of the damage. Korea just smiled and casually called playing games training, which made it seem even more shameless to Rio. But Rio tried to explain, saying the VR was part of the training instructions suggested by the Hunter Association. Korea responded, saying that might have been allowed where Rio had come from, but she still didn't think it justified what Rio had done. Then, with a smirk, Korea added that it was the same reason she had been able to pull down Rio's pajamas. After that, Korea suddenly touched Rio's pants. She told Rio that this kind of thing wouldn't be allowed at the Madara house. Korea explained that the Madara team was an on-the-field operations team, where there were no games on the battlefield. Rio, however, copied what Korea had done to her, saying, "You say all that, but can you back up your words? Prove it here and now." Korea smiled and asked if this was a challenge, to which Rio confirmed, saying, "That's right." Hashimura just watched as Amadi smiled and announced that the match between Korea and Rio was starting. She said she would be the judge, and the rule was simple. Whoever knocks down their opponent first wins. Hashimura quietly whispered to Amadi, asking if they should stop them. Amadi turned back to the group and said it was fine, that Korea had said they were just having fun. She also added that she was happy to see Rio opening up. However, Hashimura felt something was wrong, and she felt the two were angry from behind. Korea had an idea and suggested they make the match more interesting by putting a wager on it. Whoever lost would have to do whatever the winner asked. The other two seemed a bit worried by the condition, but Rio accepted it without hesitation. They both asked if Rio didn't know who Korea was. As Rio got ready, she mentioned that Korea was very strong, even though she had been improving herself, and she wasn't joking about this fight. Amadi raised her hand and noticed the tension, announcing that things were getting heated and it was time for the match to begin. Rio quickly moved, using her foot to grab her jacket and throw it at Kariya. Amadi commented that Rio had blocked Kariya's movement with the jacket. Hashimir pointed out that Rio had taken it off on purpose. Rio then swiftly moved behind Kariya, locking her arms. But Kariya remained still. Rio thought she had the perfect chance to attack, but her eyes widened when Kariya lifted her with one hand. Kariya looked seriously at her before grabbing her chest and slamming her to the ground with great power. With a smile, she declared game, set, match. Amadi, still serious, announced the winner. Rio, still hurting, wondered to herself what that move was. It was ridiculously strong. She asked herself who Kariya really was. Suddenly, Kariya's attitude shifted, and she became concerned. She asked if Rio was okay, calling her Subaru, apologizing for getting carried away. Then, with a grin, Kariya said she didn't realize Rio would be this weak. Rio was shocked by the words. The other two just watched, clearly worried. Kariya continued, saying she thought it was important to show Rio a real picture before she went on and got herself hurt. Or worse. She added that it should be enough for now and wished everyone to enjoy the rest of the day. But Rio, angry, slammed her fist against the ground, stood up, and shouted at Kariya, asking where she thought she was going. Kariya kept smiling. Rio said she could still keep fighting, to which Kariya casually replied, "Is that so? In that case, allow me to crash you up." A few hours later, Rio entered the room, looking badly beaten up. Mifune, who had been about to get ready for a shower, immediately stopped and noticed her condition. She knew right away that Kariya had done this, and Rio confirmed it. While they were in the shower, Mifune asked what Rio had chosen for the bed. Rio replied that Kariya said she would tell her when she felt like it. Then Rio asked why Mifune wasn't at the training hall. Mifune explained that she didn't train there, but preferred the courtyard instead, as she liked the outside atmosphere. Rio noticed that Mifune seemed similar to Kariya in this way. Mifune added that if she trained in the hall, Kariya would always be grabbing her chest, which made Rio uncomfortable, as Kariya often did that to her. Rio agreed, saying Kariya played around too much and it annoyed her. Mifune paused for a moment and said she was sure Kariya was trying to get close to Rio because they were in the same situation. Rio, confused, asked what she meant. Mifune explained it was because of the blood curse. Rio was shocked and asked if it was related to her superhuman strength. Mifune confirmed it, and Rio followed up, asking who Kariya really was. Mifune replied that if Rio wanted to know more about Kariya, she would have to ask her directly. Afterward, Rio decided to leave the shower room first. As she walked out, Mifune called to her, saying that Kariya and the others had the same goal and were waiting for someone like her to join them. Mifune added that Kariya was probably in her room watching a movie. Rio fell silent, remembering what Mifune had said about their shared goal. She also recalled Kariya's before words, "Maybe we can get that guy with this," and wondered if the Madara house was more than just an operations base. After getting dressed, something unusual on her back, something dark with many tentacles, though she didn't know what it was. The same strange thing was happening to the others, as they too were being followed by dark, tentacle-like creatures. Soon, one of these creatures attacked Rio from behind. Kariya quickly dealt with it, destroying it with her baseball bat. Rio, still stunned, asked what was happening and if their base was under attack. Rio, panicked, called Terra, urgently saying that vampires had infiltrated the base. She asked where the security system was and where everyone else was. Looking around, the place was in chaos with blood everywhere. She wondered where Mifune, Nano, and Quinn were, but no one answered her call. Kariya, with a serious expression, told Rio to get ready. Rio could feel something more powerful, realizing that this enemy was different from any she had faced before. Standing before them was a woman, her hair moving like tentacles, as if they had a life of their own. The woman revealed she was a high-end vampire and explained that she had come looking for high-grade ingredients. However, this find was unexpected. The two stayed silent, carefully watching and sizing up the enemy. The woman added that it didn't matter. She would make a good souvenir. Then, noticing Korea, she greeted her, saying, "Long time no see." This shocked Rio, while Korea remained serious and calmly said, "I've caught you now." Chapter 4. For 1,200 years, vampires, disguised as humans, have hunted and fed on people. Though their numbers are few, they are a powerful threat. From wars to murders, accidents to tragedies, vampires have secretly shaped the course of history. But humanity hasn't just stood by. Using silver, a substance that weakens vampires, humans have fought back in a struggle for survival against these apex predators. Over time, the Hunter Association was formed, an organization dedicated to hunting and eliminating vampires. The war between hunters and vampires rages on in the shadows. Recently, however, the vampires have gained the upper hand, thanks to a powerful new ace, an unnatural force that could tip the balance and threaten humanity's resistance. Back to the battle, the woman stood as a high-end vampire, someone Rio and Korea would have to face. Rio thought to herself that this was the first time she had encountered a vampire this strong, one who could crush an entire unit on her own. But she couldn't help but wonder, what did Korea have to do with this? The high-end vampire smiled, revealing her thoughts. She explained that the mention of high-grade ingredients was just a bait, and she had fallen for it completely. Hook, line, and sinker. She then pointed out that this must have been Korea's plan to force her to reveal the location of their friend. Rio's face showed shock as she processed the vampire's words. Turning to Korea, she asked if she knew the woman, but Korea remained silent. Rio then questioned what friend the vampire was referring to. Korea, recognizing the danger, quietly urged Rio to leave, but Rio didn't listen and continued pressing her, asking what the vampire meant by bait. The vampire, still grinning, noted how Korea hadn't shared any information with Rio. She teased Korea, calling her a bad girl for tricking her friends for selfish reasons, before adding that Korea must really miss the person they were searching for. In an instant, the vampire attacked Korea with her tendrils, moving so quickly that Rio didn't notice the strike. The vampire taunted, saying she would never reveal anything, and that she planned to kill them both and take their friend. She felt a twisted sense of joy as she imagined the praise she would receive, grinning as she spoke of it. At that moment, the vampire's hair, moving like tendrils, focused on Rio. The vampire seemed to still enjoy the situation, but Rio suddenly became alert. She quickly readied her gun and fired several shots at the vampire, all while backing away and continuing to shoot. The vampire, with a cold smile, observed that Rio was aiming straight for her head, telling her to be a good girl and come quietly. It was then that Rio realized the bullets weren't working. The vampire was too strong, and her gun was useless against her. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, Rio's phone suddenly rang, cutting through the tension. The message on the screen asked if anyone could hear her, urging a response if possible. While dodging the vampire's tendrils, Rio noticed the phone and quickly called out for Tara. The voice on the other end analyzed the situation quickly. The vampire, classified as a Category A high-end, had somehow slipped through the security system. How she managed to do so was still unclear, but it was evident that the security measures had failed, leaving them exposed to the dangerous threat. Rio, still trying to understand the situation, asked how the vampire managed to bypass security without triggering it. In response, more tendrils emerged from above, surprising Rio even more. It was then that Rio realized the vampire could shape-shift through the gaps, allowing her to slip through unnoticed. The realization hit Rio hard, understanding how dangerous her situation had become. She found herself questioning what to do next, knowing she was in serious danger. Just in time, Rio's teammates arrived. Quinn summoned a swarm of 100 honeybees, their attack strong enough to drive back the tendrils. Amadi Nano followed with their own moves, using the hammer bang bang to smash the tendrils away, while Mifyun wielded her sword, slicing through the tendrils in one clean cut. Behind the vampire, unnoticed, Korea stood, ready to strike using her baseball bat. In an instant, Korea unleashed a powerful attack, causing an explosion that shook the area. The blast was called the Flower Bomb. Rio, caught off guard by the sudden turn of events, stood in surprise, unable to fully process what had just happened. Nano went in front of Rio and asked if everything was okay, but Rio seemed still shocked, not expecting that all his teammates were safe. Mifune, on the other hand, said they were not weak enough to be killed that easily. Rio was surprised by this, especially since Mifune wasn't wearing a top. Quinn tried talking to Rio, but Rio couldn't understand, asking her to repeat what she said and to speak louder. The vampire was in bad shape, and Mifune explained she didn't have time to put on clothes because of what had just happened. Nano offered her cardigan, but Mifune knew it wouldn't fit her well. Quinn, quietly, thought to herself that no one ever listens to her. Rio watched his teammates and realized that the Madara team was far from weak. They were incredibly strong. Nano tried to make Mifune wear her cardigan, though it barely fit. Quinn was confused by everything going on. Korea told the team that the fight wasn't over yet and urged Rio to get up. Meanwhile, Nano was surprised that Mifune's chest was too big for her dress to fit. Korea heard someone ask if the vampire's earlier words were true. Rio asked if she had been used as bait, calling her blood a weapon. There was a short silence before Korea spoke, simply calling out Rio's name. Then, the vampire's tentacles moved again. "Ah, this won't do," she muttered. The vampire stood up, very angry. She felt ashamed and didn't want anyone to see her like this. If she failed to get the food, she knew she would be punished. The thought of what kind of punishment she might get made her even more upset. In her anger, her tentacles started growing back quickly. The team was getting closer to the vampire, ready to kill her. The vampire grinned, her face showing something like love or begging. She mocked them, saying that her superior might spank her. But just before the team could attack, Korea shouted for them to run, especially Rio. Suddenly, the vampire unleashed a powerful attack, sending a massive number of tentacles toward them. Rio didn't realize the attack in time. Korea made the decision to protect her, stepping in to take the powerful attack from the vampire. The tentacle hit her stomach, going deep inside. Rio was shocked, unable to believe what had just happened. Chapter 5. The vampire girl was shocked by what she had done with her attack. She realized her mistake and thought to herself that she had made another error. She also recognized that this was a bad habit of hers, and she feared she would be punished for it. Rio shot the vampire girl and told her she wasn't going anywhere. The vampire girl then spoke to Rio, complimenting her and saying that she was safe, referring to her as Subaru Rio, who she considered a valuable ingredient. Rio remained silent, focusing on holding her gun after shooting. She was protecting Korea, who had been severely injured. Rio thought to herself that even a shot to the eyeball wouldn't work. She then shouted to Korea, urging her to hang in there. The vampire stood and addressed them, saying that Korea Kaika had shielded her bait from danger, and remarked that she had become softer during her absence. The vampire girl attacked again. Rio had to dodge the attack while also carrying Korea to avoid the strike. The vampire girl noticed that Rio was now acting as a shield, and she thought that a moving target would be difficult to deal with. Rio could feel blood dripping from her thigh and knew that things were about to get worse. Suddenly, the vampire girl became hungry. She smelled something amazing and screamed loudly, saying that it was such a wonderful scent, and she had to bring it to her. Rio was worried and thought to herself that the vampire girl was struggling to hold back after smelling her blood. The vampire girl also thought to herself that Rio was in her way. Without warning, she attacked from behind. Rio was too late to realize what was happening, but she tried to shield Korea. Unfortunately, she was hit with a strong attack from behind. The vampire stood before them, feeling frustrated. She thought that things were becoming complicated. She also considered her prey to be precious and was concerned that it might be damaged. Rio whispered to herself, noticing that the vampire had paused for a moment. She realized that the vampire didn't want to kill her at that moment. Rio's voice seemed strained from exhaustion. Rio also thought to herself that the vampire had been focused on Korea, who had already suffered a fatal injury. The vampire continued speaking, addressing Korea. She called her a loyal bait, which surprised Rio, making her face show shock. The vampire then described Korea as a girl who would do anything to get her way, calling her repulsive. Looking at Korea's badly beaten and injured face, the vampire girl saw her as a coward, a liar, and an eyesore. She decided that she needed to dispose of Korea before she caused any more harm. The vampire quickly made another attack, telling Rio that Korea wasn't worth protecting, calling her a trashy girl. They were immediately thrown back by the force of the vampire girl's attack. But Rio understood everything the vampire had said. She thought to herself, knowing that Korea was a liar, a pervert, and could be a pain at times. As the vampire continued her attack, Rio kept protecting Korea from the blows. Rio kept reminding herself, despite everything, of that time when Korea had given her the chili dog. She could still hear Korea's voice in her mind, smiling at her and saying, "It was delicious." Rio's face showed that she was crying as she continued to protect Korea. She thought to herself that she wanted to do even more things with her. Eat more food together, fight side by side, and visit trendy cafes. She didn't care if Korea had lied to her or used her as bait. Despite the numerous powerful attacks coming their way, Rio remained by Korea's side. With a loud shout, Rio declared that she wanted to spend more time with this trashy girl. Suddenly, Korea stood up, opened her serious eyes, and embraced Rio. After the vampire girl made a powerful attack, she suddenly turned to look behind her. Korea spoke, saying that it was enough rest, smiling as she remarked that the vampire had 1,000 chances to kill her and blew them all. Rio's face showed shock at what had just happened. Korea seemed fine now, telling the vampire girl that it was punishment time. The vampire girl became angry, calling out Korea Kaika's name. Korea, with a serious expression, responded that she would be the one to spank her, telling the vampire to bring it on, calling her a tentacle hag. Rio shouted in worry, asking how Korea could move with her injuries. Instead of answering, Korea tightly embraced her. After a moment, Korea spoke, telling Rio that if she said such nice things, there was no way she would let herself die. But the sweet moment quickly turned as the vampire girl's anger grew. She shouted at Korea, saying that Korea thought she could spank her, questioning how she could disrespect something so sacred. Rio, looking disappointed, warned Korea that the vampire girl was preparing another attack and that Korea had really pissed her off. Korea, shocked, responded by asking what she had done, calling the vampire girl just a weirdo. The vampire girl, angrily, declared that this time she would finish the job, drill more holes into Korea, and her master would praise her. Rio noticed that the vampire girl was drooling and losing control, realizing that her blood was having an effect. She immediately called out to Korea, telling her to leave everything to her. Korea, worried, shouted in concern for Rio. Rio then took Mifyun's sword and ran forward, thinking back to her past. She remembered being a scared girl, afraid because of her blood and the terrible things that had happened because of it. She wasn't sure if what she was doing would work, but she knew that the lessons she had learned since joining Madara were guiding her. When Rio reached her position, she reminded herself that her blood could be a weapon to save others. Without hesitation, she slashed her palm with the sword, and the vampire girl immediately became more active. Korea couldn't believe what Rio had just done. Rio's blood dripped from the sword, and the vampire, unable to control herself, went into a frenzy. With her many tentacles, she quickly attacked Rio. Chapter 6. The vampire girl became uncontrollable, as if she could no longer control herself due to Rio's blood. Meanwhile, Korea shouted Rio's name because of what Rio had done by confronting the high-end vampire girl. Rio confidently thought to herself that the vampire girl would eventually die on her own. She quickly rushed toward her opponent, skillfully dodging the vampire's tentacles. Rio thought to herself that the vampire's hunger was affecting her mind, making her attacks predictable. All Rio had to do was dodge, get closer, and finish the vampire girl. She prepared her sword, but suddenly, Rio was hit in the stomach by an attack, and Korea screamed loudly when this happened. The vampire girl, still out of control from the blood, said that she couldn't stand it anymore, that all she wanted was one bite of Rio's blood, and then she would give the rest to her master. The vampire's tentacles continued to strike at Rio, and she felt like the attacks were endless. However, Rio realized that the vampire girl's body hadn't moved an inch and was taking a long time to regenerate. She understood that it wasn't an attack, but a defense mechanism to keep Rio away from the main body. Rio could barely see the vampire girl, but readied her sword and ran forward, thinking that beyond the tentacles and the storm of attacks, there was victory. The vampire girl noticed Rio approaching from behind. Rio prepared to swing her sword, saying that for the longest time, she had been scared. She didn't know what to do when she made friends, but now she wasn't scared anymore because she understood she had nothing to fear. Afterward, Rio successfully cut off the vampire's head from her body. She fell to the ground, exhausted from everything that had happened. She looked at her blood-covered palm and cried, feeling both relief and sadness over what she had done to the vampire girl. But then, the vampire girl spoke, saying, "You thought you could kill me by cutting off my head? Well, sorry to disappoint you. I'm not your average vampire." Rio was shocked, saying, "Even that wasn't enough." The vampire girl taunted, asking if this was the best Rio could do, saying that food was just food, after all. Before she could say more, something suddenly stomped on her face, stopping her from speaking. It was Korea, who seriously announced her technique, Massacre Bat Technique. The vampire girl tried to speak to Korea, but she couldn't, while Rio shouted to Korea, asking what she was doing now. The vampire girl knew what Korea was about to do to her, while Rio continued shouting, saying Korea shouldn't fight because of her injuries. But Korea, determined, firmly said to the vampire girl, "You lowly human." The vampire girl tried to scream, but couldn't. Finally, Korea attacked, calling her move Sakura Storm. The strength of the attack was so powerful that Rio could barely move. Korea continued to strike her with her baseball bat. Rio was amazed by Korea's ability to fight against the vampire girl's regeneration with constant hits. The vampire girl could only scream, unable to do anything because of Korea's attack. Suddenly, Korea's eye changed like a vampire too, and she kept attacking with her bat. The vampire girl suddenly leaped, her body barely recognizable, as her form disintegrated from the destruction of her body. Korea smiled as she looked at the vampire girl, mocking her appearance. Rio, however, interrupted Korea, pointing out that Korea was starting to look like the vampire. The vampire girl then gave a cryptic statement, saying that she had bad news to report and would be leaving now. She added that they would meet again, referring to Korea as number 7, before disappearing. Both Rio and Korea watched the spot where the vampire had vanished. After the fight, Rio felt a sense of relief, while Korea closed her other eye, trying to return it to normal. Korea asked Rio about her injuries, and Rio responded that she was fine. Then, Rio asked about Korea's injuries. Before Korea could answer, Rio suddenly pushed her, causing Korea to fall. Korea, angered by this, demanded to know what Rio was doing. But Rio told her that she shouldn't be talking about injuries and insisted Korea take off her hoodie. Korea, feeling uncomfortable, yelled that it was sexual harassment. After Rio pulled up the hoodie, she saw that Korea's stomach, where the vampire's tentacles had pierced her, had healed. Only a large scar remained. Rio stood silently for a moment, then asked Korea what was really going on, requesting that she explain everything. Chapter 7. The day after the events, everyone gathered for a party to welcome Rio Subaru. However, Rio's face showed that she wasn't enjoying the situation, despite the recent battles being over. Rio called out to Nano, who apologized for the late welcome, explaining that they hadn't had a chance to meet earlier. She mentioned that she hadn't expected an ambush to happen on the day of the party. Mifyun then questioned whether it was really the right time for a party, given the circumstances. Korea, while eating, told Mifyun not to talk with food in her mouth, and Nano also reminded Korea to do the same. The argument between Mifyun and Korea became louder. Mifyun commented that it was hard to fight on an empty stomach, to which Korea responded by criticizing Mifyun's appearance, mentioning that all of her food seemed to go to her chest. Mifyun explained that her room had been destroyed, so she was wearing whatever she could find. Quinn, who seemed annoyed by the conversation, thought to herself that what Mifyun was wearing was just her camisole. Nano then tried to calm everyone down, telling them that it was a party and they should be having fun. She turned to Rio to ask if she was enjoying herself. Rio hesitated for a moment before agreeing that parties are fun, adding that she had even received a sash as part of the celebration. Suddenly, Rio stood up and kicked the objects in front of her, surprising everyone. In anger, she shouted that there were more important matters to focus on. Nano, confused, realized that Rio wasn't having fun after all. Rio then looked at Korea and asked her to share everything she knew. Korea scratched her head, sighed, and revealed that she was hunting a vampire. This vampire, the one with the tentacles, was someone they had spoken about earlier. While no one knew where the vampire was, Korea explained that this creature was a hardcore gourmet. Rio then mentioned that she was high-quality ingredients, which could be used to lure the vampire. Korea explained that the vampire was extremely strong and untraceable. She was considered a top threat even among the high-end vampires and was known as the living disaster. Rio then asked Korea what she had to do with the vampire. Korea turned to Rio, her eye changing into a vampire's eye, and revealed that the vampire was her mother, Korea Kashiko. Rio was shocked upon hearing this. Korea continued explaining that she was a half-human, half-vampire hybrid, the product of a high-end vampire and a human. She pulled up her shirt to reveal a wound in the center of her body, showing how she had inherited the blood curse. Rio focused on the wound, which had already healed completely. Korea clarified that while her regeneration allowed her to heal, it didn't make her immortal. If Rio hadn't bought enough time for her to recover, she would have died. Korea acknowledged that Rio had saved her life. Rio stood silent, trying to process everything she had just heard. After a moment, she spoke, realizing that if Korea's mother was a vampire, then Korea herself must be one too. Korea had expected Rio to say that, so she explained that her earliest memories were of being in a vampire research facility. This revelation shocked Rio. Korea continued her story, describing how she was known as a high-end vampire-human hybrid. To the researchers, she was considered a jackpot, and they referred to her as Number 7, not by her real name. The tentacled woman who had been feeding her was one of the researchers. The facility was destroyed by a hunter, and Korea had suffered greatly, having been subjected to countless experiments. She noted that this was a story for another time. The escaped hybrids, or strays, had started preying on humans. Rio interrupted, asking about the predatory behavior, wondering if that was why Korea had become a hunter. Korea responded seriously, stating that her mother, Korea Kashiko, was a threat to humanity, and it only made sense for her to stop that threat. However, she wouldn't do it alone. The Madara House, Unit 6, was tasked with killing Korea Kashiko, her vampire mother.